So we learned in the last chapter why the average total cost curve is important. It tells us what's going on with the profit margins of the firm. We learned in the previous video, talking about the profit maximizing quantity, why the marginal cost curve is important. I already told you average fixed cost curve isn't important, so that leaves one cost curve that we haven't talked about why it's important, right? So the shutdown point, it can kind of be labeled as why we care about the AVC, right? Why the AVC is important. And so the shutdown point answers the question, should we keep producing when making a loss? This question seems like it should be an easy one to answer, right? And no, if you're making a loss, stop producing, right? It's not that easy though. Why isn't it that easy?
We care about contribution margin rather than a total loss.
Not necessarily. So why isn't it easy?
Because sometimes your market price is above your variable cost, and so you're going to be making a contribution margin on that.
Oh yeah, through the fixed costs. Yes. So what Yang is saying is that we're in the short run here, right? In all of these situations here, unless we're explicitly told we're in the long run, we're in the short run. So we can't adjust our fixed capital. We can't adjust our fixed costs. And so this becomes an issue of, can we recoup some of the fixed costs? Or are we losing more money now compared to shutting down and losing the fixed cost? So if we are in a situation where the market price results in, well, first of all, let's just talk about a wonderful situation, right? If this is the situation, if this is our market price that we get from, there's some supply and demand graph that ends up giving us this price, right? This ends up being our demand equals our marginal revenue equals our price, right? If we're at this particular situation, we're doing good. We're going to have a profit maximizing quantity where the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. So we're going to drop that quantity down there. We're going to find where that quantity intersects with the average total cost. And we're going to figure out that this is the profit rectangle. If we looked at the equilibrium price and then we multiplied that by, if we look at the equilibrium quantity and then we multiply that by P minus ATC, that's going to give me that profit box. So this is a great situation where the market price is above your average total costs. And that's an important thing for us to consider here is every firm's average total costs are different. Some firms are going to have average total costs that are up here. Some firms are going to have average total costs that are down here. And your average total cost changes over time. So this is one situation. Great situation to be in. It's short-lived. We'll talk about why it's short-lived in a bit. So the other situation that I want to talk about, let's do the other extreme. What if market price was all the way down here? So if our marginal revenue is down here, we still have that same profit maximizing decision that we're making. Q stars where the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost curve. But now we have to go up to find the average total cost, because now instead of a profit, we're making a loss. Again, same formula. Well, let's just say profit and then loss in parentheses. So I don't want to define loss, because if I define loss, then the average total cost has to be the thing that price is being subtracted out of. So it makes more sense to just define this as our profit and realize that this is going to be a negative number, right? When the ATC is greater than the price, the profit is negative. So in this situation, we are losing so much money that we would be better off shutting down. So when the marginal revenue or the demand curve crosses the marginal cost curve below the average variable cost curve, right? This whole thing is subtitled why the average variable cost curve is important. So some of you could probably have figured that out by now. But if this is below where the average total cost curve crosses the marginal cost, right, then we're better off shutting down. So this is telling us that if we stayed in operation here, we'd be losing, let's say, $800 instead of losing the $600 for our fixed costs. So if our marginal revenue is below our average variable cost, we're unable to recoup any of our fixed costs. Everybody understand why we would shut down here? Okay. So now let's talk about the interesting situation. So the interesting situation lies in here. So in here, if we had a demand equals marginal revenue equals price, then again, we would find where the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost. We would drop down our Q star. Then we would go up to our total cost, not very far to go, and calculate that amount of loss that we're making. And in this particular scenario, the amount of loss that we're making is very minute, right? We can see that. It's hard for me to even graph the rectangle of it. Very minute. And so whenever we're above the marginal cost, whenever we're above the average total cost, we're going to stay in operation. So we call this point where the average variable cost crosses the marginal cost the shutdown point. We call it the shutdown point because if your demand were for some reason to drop, oh no, not what I wanted, down here, right, we'd be in that situation where we just talked about. We'd be in that situation where we're losing more money than we would be losing if we just shut down completely and paid our fixed costs. There are certain costs we can't get rid of, right? Our mortgage, our rent, we signed a lease for a year for this coffee shop, but if we're losing so much money, it makes more sense for us to shut down and just pay that rent out of pocket rather than try to keep operating the place And again, it's better to lose $600 than it is to lose $6,000, right? But if we have a situation here, now we're comparing losing $300 by staying in operation to losing $600 by shutting down. So losing $300 is better than losing $600, right? We always want to minimize the amount of money that we're losing. The other reason why we won't shut down when we're in this region is because what I told you guys earlier, every firm has different average total costs, right? So this market price might result in you making a slight loss, right? But let's say somebody else has much higher total costs, right? When that total cost increases, the average variable cost increases with it. So if somebody else were encountering that same exact market price, but their cost curves are up here, they're going to leave the industry. And when they leave the industry, that's going to impact the market price. We're going to get to that in a second here. So we have to keep in mind that not everybody is having the identical average total cost, average variable cost curves, and those differences in those curves are going to drive different decisions of whether to shut down or to kind of wait it out and hope that the market price recovers and becomes greater than the average total cost soon. And in fact, when more producers exit the industry, that's exactly what happens. So we'll talk about that in a second.